Let's start by reviewing the pattern pieces that come in this version of the Emo bag. So what you're going to need is, from the original pattern, you're going to need your main piece. Really, you just need the front for what I'm about to show you, but you'll of course need the front and the back. But for our purposes today for this tutorial, you're going to need the front main A piece from the original pattern. Then from the additional pattern pieces that come with the monster version, you're going to need to cut out your ear pieces. So you're going to want to cut out 2 of them facing one way, flip your pattern piece over, and cut out 2 more. So you're going to have the mirrored version of the ear piece. So you're going to have 4 pieces all together. So notice that there's curves that are facing opposite ways. So make sure you have 4 of those. And then you're going to need a couple of pieces here. So this is going to act as your highlights. So this is just one big white oval. You're also going to need some another dark piece. I recommend either a dark brown or a black. This is going to act as your outlines, for outlines around some of the cutouts. So you'll just need one piece here, and I'm using vinyl. So I do want to point that out. So any type of vinyl will be fine. I would stay away from the thicker vinyls. I find that they're just harder to layer, harder to sew through. You're going to be sewing through 3 layers of vinyl to do this. So make sure you're using something that is like a light to medium weight vinyl, just nothing super heavy duty. Marine vinyl is fine as long as your machine can handle 3 layers of it. Most can, but just kind of forewarning you there, make sure your machine can handle getting through the layers. Then also something to act as the face. So like a flesh colored vinyl, and you'll just need one of those pieces. Then you're going to need, for your ears, some accents. So you're going to have, very similar to what we have on the face, is you're going to have some of these outlines. So again, there is a pattern piece that is facing one way. You're going to cut out one the regular way, flip it over, and you're going to have a mirrored version. So there'll be 2 total pieces. Same thing for the flesh colored parts of the ears, one facing one way, one facing the other. And then for the interior parts of the ear, you're going to need 1 of each. So again, one facing one way, flip it over, and one facing the other. And then to finish out the face, you're going to need 2 of these eye pieces. Again, I recommend something dark, like a black or dark brown. So you need 2 of those. And then 1 nose piece. So I like to keep the accent for the nose piece and the accent for the ears the same color. So the way that these are going to come together, we're going to layer all of this. Your highlights piece will be at the bottom. Then we're going to layer our outlines. Then we're going to layer our face. So just so you have an idea of how to design this for yourself, this is what it's going to look like in the end. So you'll put your eyes here, nose here, then you're going to have your ears, and you're going to have your outlines at the bottom, your flesh color pieces on top of that, and then these highlights. So this is why I'm saying you may want these highlights for the ears to match your nose. That's typically how these monster dolls are, is usually the nose matches those highlights in the ears. So that's how it's going to come together in the end. Okay? So now we'll move on to our next step. The other 2 items I recommend that you use for this are thread lubricant if you're not going to use a Teflon foot to stitch, and Beacon 3-in-1 glue. This is a flexible glue. It dries more flexible and you can sew through it without it, gumming up your needle. So these are the two items I recommend you have in addition to matching thread, needle, etc. The thread lubricant can be found through Wawak, but you can also get it on like Amazon. Maybe some quilt shops still might carry the Dritz version of this thread lubricant. It depends. I can't really find the Dritz version in most places any longer. So I have just been buying Wawax, plus Wawax is cheaper and it comes in a larger bottle. Beacon 3-in-1 can be found at any craft supply store like Michael's. It can even be found at big box stores, online, on Amazon. It's pretty readily available. Okay, so let's start with the face first. You're going to need your highlights piece and your outlines piece. What we're going to do is we're just going to layer these together, but we're going to glue it. So I recommend always gluing to keep things in place before you sew. I like to use very sparingly just a little bit of glue along the openings of your outlines piece. I'm just putting a couple of dots. I'm not really heavy-handed with it. I'm not getting super close to the edge, but close enough. And the same thing around the mouth. This is really just to keep the vinyl in place while you sew. It does not need to look pretty. You do not want to put this on the whole piece of this outlines piece because we're going to cut some of it away when we're done. So that's why I'm recommending just go around your openings and not around the entirety of the piece. So once you have that applied to the wrong side, we're going to flip this over. And just be careful, line up the edges here. It's okay if your glue kind of shifts and moves around. You can always just wipe it off with your finger or a towel and just kind of lightly press with your fingers around the openings. Then you're going to let this dry. It only takes, I don't know, a few minutes to get everything dried. So don't worry about it. It's not going to be like 20 minutes to dry. So go ahead and just set this aside, let it dry. I don't advise putting clips or anything on it. This really should be enough just to keep it in place while you sew. So we don't really care about it being perfect. So set that aside, let it dry. Okay, so it's been a few minutes. Everything should be nice and dry. We're going to now put this aside and we're going to move on to the face piece, so the flesh colored piece. On the wrong side, we're going to do the same thing that we did with our outlines. So we're going to put a few, just, beads of glue around the openings. You don't need to go crazy. You do not want the glue to squeeze out of the opening, so this is why I'm not putting too much. Just enough to keep things in place while we stitch around the openings. Same thing with the mouth. Notice I'm probably spreading out the dots, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch-ish. I'm just randomly doing this in spots. I am trying to get into the points a little bit, just so that stays in place. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing that we did before in the previous step. We're going to flip this around and we're going to try to line everything up as best you can. This is the trickiest part of this entire applique, is getting it lined up. And do not worry if it's not perfect right away, or if you have glue coming out, we'll wipe it away. And just push it down with your fingers. Don't worry about it not being perfect. I'm more saying this for myself. And you're just pressing it down. Do not push your fingers. You're going to press down. Do not slide them around, it will shift the applique. So we're pressing downwards. We're not pressing side to side. Okay. So same thing, we're gonna wait for this to dry, give it like, you know, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step, but go ahead and let it dry. Okay, so now that your glue is dry, we're going to stitch along the openings. So on this flesh colored part, you're going to stitch all the way around the first eye, second eye, the nose, and then the mouth. I try to get as close as I can to the edge without going over it, so about a 1/16 of an inch or so. When you're stitching around the nose, what you're probably going to end up doing is you will have this line of stitching here, and you'll have a line of stitching around the nose. This is why I like to try to get really, really tight. If you don't, and you're a little bit further away when you're stitching your eye, it's okay to skip stitching like around this part of the nose where it's closest to the eye, and just stitch kind of above it and join your stitch lines by kind of, you know, stitching from like here to about here. Same with the bottom, stitching maybe from here down and up this way. It's fine. However, you feel like it's going to look the best without having too much thread showing. It is really tight here, so apologies for that, but this is the way that it looked the best. So, you know, similarly with the mouth, you know, you're going to get as close as you can kind of to these points here without going over it. But, you know, do what you can. This is why we also glued it down. Even if you don't get right up into that point, it's fine. I mean, it might flop a little bit. You can always add a little bit more glue or just leave it alone. It's not going to make that much of a difference. I also recommend when you're stitching your applique that you use like a medium-ish stitch length. So I'm going to be sewing on a Juki TL18. So it is considered a domestic machine. It's a quilting machine, but it's a powerful motor, and you know, I can kind of get away with a lot with that machine. I stitch using at least something more complicated like this. I'll stitch using a 3mm stitch length, especially because I need to get into some of these tight spots. I don't want super long stitches, but I also don't want something so small that it's going to rip the vinyl. So I find that a 3mm stitch length for something like this works great. For something that's less complicated, a 3.5 or 4mm stitch length is perfectly acceptable. The other thing I'll point out too is I know a lot of people like to use contrasting thread. This is probably not the time to use contrasting thread. You probably do want it to blend in. So try to find some thread that closely matches your skin tone. And then the same thing with, you know, any of your accents. So I will have kind of like this peachy color thread, and then I have like this light mint green or sage green thread that I'm going to use when we stitch on these pieces, just so that it blends in really nicely. Otherwise, oh, and I also have a dark brown that I'll be using for the eyes, so that blends. So if you want it to look more professional, definitely change out your thread. I know it's a pain in the neck. Wind your bobbins ahead of time. You know, that way you can just kind of go through your project without any issues. So we're going to go over to the machine. I'm going to show you how I stitch this, and I'll probably end up speeding this up somewhat once I kind of give you a general idea of how I'm stitching everything on. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is apply some thread lubricant. So this is from Wawak. Dritz also makes a version called Sewer's Aid. And this is really just to help my presser foot glide over the vinyl. So I don't like to use a Teflon foot. And the reason is I find it hard to do complicated applique work with that Teflon foot. I find it very difficult to see where my stitches are landing. So I like to use a 3mm narrow hinged zipper foot. And the zipper foot is about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the presser foot to my needle. So I use that a lot for top stitching and applique work like this. So I can get into like really tight spaces when I'm sewing bags with it, but then also it's really ideal for applique work like this, where I need to get super close to the edge without going over. I still have to kind of move around and move the presser foot up and down just to kind of see where I'm going at times, but I find it really, really helpful. So I'm just spreading this around with my finger. I'm only putting some drops kind of where I need to sew. So it's just in the path of where my stitching is going to go, and that's going to help everything glide. Okay, so I'm going to start on one of the eyes, and I just try to get as close as I can to the openings without going over into this darker outline area. So let's see, I'll start with this one here on the side. I will speed it up once we kind of get going a little bit more. I think I'm going to start here. I always hold my tails. I am not going to backstitch. I literally go one step at a time. If you have a knee lift, use that knee lift. There is no need to do more work than you really need to. So notice I'm stitching, lifting, so I can see where I'm going next, because I'm pivoting as when I lift. So I have it down, I lift it up a little bit, I pivot a little, and I keep going. So I'm going to do this all the way around, and I'm maybe 1/16 of an inch or so away from that opening. I'm not super close, I'm not super far. Whatever look you like, whatever you're comfortable with is what you should use. Okay, so when you get to these corners, you might want to hand crank and shorten that stitch length to where you want it to land before you turn around. Just looking to see where I am. Where am I going to land here? Yep, okay. I think I'm going to hand crank a couple stitches here. You don't need to be perfect. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not too far away, that's all. If you are, you are. But this is why we're also using the same color thread as, as the vinyl. Okay, so when you're approaching your last few stitches, I recommend hand cranking, and you want your final stitch to land in the same hole as what you started. So I'm just kind of maneuvering it over there. I think I'm in the same hole. Pretty sure. So then don't backstitch, just pull your threads. I think my tension's a little off because it looks like it's pulling my vinyl. But that's okay, it's not terrible. I don't think anyone's going to notice. So I don't know if you can see this up close, but my tension is off. It's pulling at the edges here. So I'm going to have to loosen it a bit. And that's my bobbin thread. If it's on the top, If your tension's off on the top, it's your bobbin thread. If it's off on the back, it's your top thread. My back looks perfect. My bobbin's a little tight. So I'll adjust that before I move on to the rest of this. But let's go ahead and at least finish this part of it. So I'm just using a paper towel to wipe off some of the excess thread lubricant that's around here. I'm going to pull my stitches to the back. And then we're going to triple knot. Okay, so I'm going to adjust my bobbin tension. I'll be back. Okay, so I finished the other eye and the stitching looks a lot better. I might actually redo this stitching and go exactly in the same holes because the tension, you can tell it's different from each side. So I'll do that later. So we'll just keep stitching around all of the openings, the nose, the mouth, because I got kind of, far out from the edge of the eye. I'm probably just going to stitch below the nose and above the nose just to kind of complete that outline. And then I'll stitch around the mouth. Okay, so I just snapped a thread right here. So if that happens to you, here's what I do. I always use fray check when I'm knotting anything. So I'm going to use some fray check there, and I'm also going to use some strong tape just to make sure the threads don't unravel. Oh, I was going to redo one of the eyes. Well, I fray checked everything. That's okay. I'll still redo one of the eyes. But I do fray check it there. I let it dry, and I'll probably also put some tape over it so it doesn't come unraveled. You could also just unpick some of the stitching, probably from here to here, and then redo that stitching just so you can tie it all. We'll see if this works for me. If I don't feel like it's secure enough, that's probably what I'll do. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll come back and redo some of the stitching on the eye that I don't like, and potentially on that part of the mouth where I snap the stitch. Okay, so to fix some of the stitching that I was just mentioning, what I did was I removed all of the stitching around this eye and then part of the mouth. I removed enough so that I could knot this one end here. And then this was already knotted here. So I'm going to just follow the same exact spots where I sewed before. I'm going to have my needle land directly into those same spots when I'm stitching. So more than likely I'm going to have to hand crank all of this, but that's how I would suggest fixing it if you're not happy with your stitch quality, or if you do what I did and yanked your stitches far too tight and then broke your thread. I am very much, in my defense, I am very much used to sewing with a heavier weight thread, so I need to pull it tighter. I rarely use something that is thinner like this, so I broke the thread when I tied. It's always something, right? Once again, I'm going to use a little bit of thread lubricant since it's now all dried, just so that nothing sticks. And I'm going to only just use a few drops. And I'm going to spread it with my finger. Okay, so then the mouth is fixed, so you can't even tell that I fixed that part. Now on to the eye. Okay, so this one's now fixed too. So you can see that now the quality of stitching is pretty much the same. I was getting something weird. It was something was going on with my bobbin, but I fixed it. So now it looks fine. Okay, so now we're going to go and take the eyes in the nose, flip it around so it's on the wrong side, and we're going to apply some glue. Just enough to keep it in place. We're going to line this up inside of these openings. So do your best to center it. You'll have some time before the glue dries to kind of move it around. I think that's right. Yep. And then for the eyes, I like to have the holes in the eyes at the top. You just want them to be even when you're lining them up. And just press it down with your finger. Just gently so it doesn't shift on you. Just remember pressing it down. Downward motion, not side to side, because you don't want it shifting. I think that looks about right to me. Okay, and then we're going to let that dry. Okay, so now that this is all dry, what we're going to do is we're going to stitch on the inside of this nose as close to the edges as you can get, about 1/16 of an inch away. Same thing with the eyes. Stitch around the eye. Now, you have a choice. You can stitch along the outer edges of the eye and leave this center circle unsewn, or you can go ahead and stitch it. I haven't decided what I'm going to do. I might just sew the outer edges and leave the center alone. It's not really going to lift since we did use some glue. I would like to stitch around it, but we'll see. When you're stitching something a little, I guess harder because it's so small to stitch around, you might want to go ahead and decrease your seam allowance for these smaller circles. I'm going to be using a 3mm stitch length, but I might reduce it to like a 2.5 around here. Problem with doing that, just keep this in mind, is that your vinyl can rip a lot easier. So just be really careful you're not using something that is too narrow of a stitch length when you're stitching around any of this. So just watch it. You should be okay though. One thing I forgot to point out is we are going to change our thread for the eyes and for the nose. So for the eyes, I'm going to use this dark brown color so it blends, so you can't tell if I make a mistake. And then for the nose, I'm going to change that to the sage green color, which will also match what we're going to be doing on our ears. So I may go ahead and do my brown first for my eyes, change to green so I can do my nose, and it'll stay green for when I do my ears. Okay, so we're going to put a little thread lubricant on the eyes. I think I put a little too much thread lubricant on the eyes. Okay, so we're going to be stitching on the inside of the eyes. Again, I'm going to be using a 3mm stitch length. I'm going to try to get as close as I can to that outer edge as possible without going into the white part. If you weren't going slow before, this is the time to go real slow. The other thing you can do too, if you are not comfortable with sewing curves, is you can draw where you need to stitch. So for vinyl, I like to use a silver marking pen. Let's see if I have one here. I do. This one is from Mormino. So it's a silver marking pen and it rubs right off. So you can mark where you want to stitch. Go ahead and stitch right over the marks. When you're done, you can wipe it right off with like a paper towel, like a wet paper towel, an alcohol swab, something like that. You can also use chalk too. I just find that chalk is a little too thick. And silver marking pens, you can get kind of more of a fine detail. I'm going to wait to pull these threads to the back. They're not going to be in my way stitching the other side, so I'm going to leave them for now and go ahead and keep stitching. For some reason, I can't pull this thread to the back, so I'm going to use a needle. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's going to be really hard to see this on camera to see where I stitched. All right, so I'm going to change my thread to this sage green color and then I'll be back. Okay, so I changed up my thread. I'm just going to put a couple drops of thread lubricant on my nose. We're going to do what we did on our eyes, which is sewing along the inner edge of the green part now. Getting as close as you can to the outer edge, whatever you're comfortable with, around a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. If you need to decrease your stitch length, I say do it. I'm probably going to stitch at a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. Okay, so before moving on to the next step, I highly recommend you use some fray check just to secure the knots. So just go throughout your project and put some fray check. I think I did on some of these already. I don't remember which ones, so I'm just going to do them again. I know I didn't on the part that I was fixing on the mouth. So I'm going to let that dry before moving on to the next step, but you can set this aside and just let it dry. Okay, so then once the fray check has dried on the other side, we're going to be trimming away some of this vinyl because it's thick. Okay, so in the instructions, I tell you that you can grade the vinyl so that you don't have just two bulky pieces. The reason why you want to do that is depending on how thick your vinyl is here on the face, you might see some of the outlines of where you cut away the vinyl. And we don't want that. Now, you could have just left it like this and we can just go ahead and stitch this onto our main piece, but you might have some of this showing. So it's really up to you if you want to follow through with this step. I do, just so it makes it easier for me to stitch. So we're just going to trim away any of the vinyl. You could use regular scissors, applique, you know, scissors like duckbill scissors, whatever you have handy is fine. You don't need to trim away everything, just as much as you feel comfortable doing. Don't stress about it if you can't get really close. We just don't want it showing on the edges is all. So if you can get pretty close to the stitches along the outer edge, you're fine. So that's all I'm going to do. I know in the instructions it has you cutting like really deep into the vinyl. Don't worry about it. And notice I have like jagged edges. It's fine. I should have pulled out the duckbill scissors. Makes it easier. Oh well. That's fine. All right, I pulled out the duckbill scissors just because it's annoying me. I don't like that it's all jagged. Not that anyone's going to be able to tell, to be honest. But I can show you, this is how close you can get. You can get pretty close to those stitch lines when you pull out the duckbill scissors. Because you're just laying this, the paddle part of the scissors, flat. And then the other part of it is really what's cutting. But see how close I can get to that stitch line? It's nice. If you do a lot of applique work, I highly recommend getting a pair of these. Okay, so we got pretty close. So this next layer, when I say grade it, what I mean is rather than have the cutting of the vinyl match, or the trimming of the vinyl match the edge of this white part here, we're going to have it maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch away from that edge that we just cut. That way you don't have the chance of it actually showing through to the other side is just less, that's all. You just don't want prominent ridges. So something like that. It doesn't need to be pretty. Okay, so that's what it should look like. Okay, so now you're going to take your main A piece from the main pattern and your finished face, and we're going to stitch this on. We are going to try to keep all of this in place with some double-sided tape or glue. Either is fine. Because I have a fuzzy fabric, this is I think it's called a teddy bear fleece fabric. I'm going to use double-sided tape. Now, you can line this up wherever you want. I think I have you pretty much centering it. So you could center it, you can place it a little further down. It's totally up to you, however you want to do this. I'm trying to decide how I want it because my ears are going to stick up here. I think I might keep this a little bit further down like that. Okay, so just grab your double-sided tape. I'm using 1/2 inch. And you do not have to be precise with this. You just need to stay in place while you sew. So I'm just going to place a few pieces. So that it doesn't move on me. Just keep it out of your seam allowance. All right, where did I say I wanted it? Like here? Center it as best you can. Mine's a little off. So this is what I'm trying to mimic. So his face is a little further down. There's a little bit more room up here at the top. Because this is a perfect circle and not more oblong like this, it's not going to be perfect, but we'll get close. Okay, just press that in place. And then we're going to stitch all the way along the outer edge here, around the outer edge here, about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch away. And again, we're not going to backstitch. We're going to pull our threads to the back, just like we did the applique itself. Before we stitch, I'm going to put a little bit of thread lubricant on my vinyl, just like we've been doing all along. And just spread it with your finger. Forgot to mention that if you wanted his face to jet out a little bit, you can also put a little bit of foam underneath before you stick this down, and that would give it a little bit more of a 3D effect. Notice that since I'm using a little bit of a fluffier material, it does have a little bit of dimension. I mean, it's small, it's slight, but it's super, super cute. Make sure, forgot to mention this, make sure that before you stitch this on, that you have stabilized this main A piece. So you want it to have the stabilizer already. You don't want to be putting this through a heat press after you've had this pretty vinyl, or after you've had this pretty applique already stitched down. You can, but you'd be risking melting any of your vinyl with heat. It just depends on the type of vinyl you're using. So I definitely recommend stabilizing first. Because of the material that I'm using, I am using a pretty thin, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a faux fur. I think it's called like a teddy bear fleece, I think is what it is. Fleece, faux fur, something. And I had to, if you're going to use something like this, I mean, it's super thin. It's like thin. I used SF101 and I used Peltex. I normally don't use Peltex in bags, but this stuff was really thin, so I felt like it needed something. I'm not able to pull this through. I think it's because I have the Peltex. It's not doing it for me. So I'll just put it through a needle. I'm also going to use a little fray check here on my knot. And then your face is on. So cute, right? Okay, so now that the face is onto the main A piece, we're going to take the lining piece and we're going to put this wrong sides together, lining up the center marks. I guess you don't really have to line up the center marks. I made center marks here so that I could easily identify it after I've basted. So I am going to line up center marks for myself. And then we're going to baste all the way around the edges. So this is so I can identify it when I put my gusset on, like which is the center bottom and center top. So I'm just going to put a few clips along the sides. Okay, so then using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to base stitch all the way around. I'm sorry, a 1/8 inch seam allowance, sorry. We're going to baste all the way around. So this is what it should look like. Okay, so once we're at this point, let's move on to our ears. Okay, so then the first step for the ears is to take your outlines piece and then that ear, flesh colored ear piece. We're going to attach these just like we did with the face. So on the wrong side of these two pieces, you're just going to take your glue again, and we're just going to place small droplets of glue around the opening here. Not too much, you don't need a ton. Just enough to keep it in place while you sew. And you don't want it on the whole thing, just on that opening. Okay, so now we're going to line things up. So go ahead and flip this over, and you want this approximately centered. If it doesn't match up, it doesn't match up. That's okay. But about an even amount of this darker vinyl should be on the left and right side of the opening. So if I flip this over, I'm close. Close enough. You just want enough to cover and to catch it when you're stitching, that's all. So I think that's fine. You can do the same thing on this one here. I'm going to probably just do it this way, just so I can see what I'm doing at the bottom. And just press it down. Oops. I did not press it well. Okay, I might need a little bit more glue. Depending on the vinyl that you have, this one has kind of a fuzzy a fuzzy back to it. You might need a little bit more glue. The fuzzier ones tend to absorb the glue more, so sometimes they're a little trickier to get glued down. So I go a little more heavy-handed and it should be fine. So I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this on camera, but there's about an even amount of this darker vinyl to the left and to the right. So that's what it looks like on the back. So it's pretty even. I might redo this one because I think my glue is going to be not enough here, because it is kind of on the fuzzier side. So I'm just putting larger droplets is all I'm doing. Still not using a ton. But notice it's still about centered. Okay. So now we're going to let those dry. Okay, so now that the glue is dry on the ears, we're going to go ahead and stitch them just like we did with the face. We're going to start by stitching from the bottom side of this arc all the way up to the other side. That's all we're going to do. We're going to do one stitch all the way around. We're going to be about 1/16 of an inch away from this opening. We're going to be stitching on this flesh colored vinyl and only on the flesh colored part. And we're going to do it on both ears. Same tips as the face. Make sure you're using a matching thread so that it looks more professional. But other than that, it's going to be very similar to what we just did on the face. Okay, so we're just going to put a few drops of thread lubricant on the on the ears. And then just spread it with your finger, just like we did with the face. And we're only going to be stitching around the openings here on both sides. Start at the bottom, go over the curve and the arch, and end at the bottom. So now these are done. You don't need to really do anything with the tails. You can knot them if you want. This is all going to be in the seam allowance. So you could just leave them alone. I'll just go ahead and just tie it off at the bottom. Okay, so that's what they should look like. Okay, so just like we did with the face, we're going to glue these little accent pieces into the inside here of the ears. So flip them around so that the wrong sides are facing up. And we're going to glue this again. And I'm putting a little bit extra glue just because this is the fuzzy stuff that doesn't like to stay glued down. Okay, so we're going to align this on the inside. Just make sure that there's enough of this darker vinyl all along the edges, the top and sides. Don't worry if the bottom part of this overlaps the bottom edge. Depending on how you lined everything up, it might not align perfectly. But we'll cut off the bottom. I think that looks good there. And then we'll do this one. Take a look at both of them and just make sure that they're somewhat matching. I think we're fine. Okay, so just again, press down with your fingers. Do not press side to side, otherwise it will shift. Make sure everything's lined up the way you want. And we're gonna let this dry. Okay, so now that the ears are dry, we're gonna stitch around the green part. So along the inner edge here of the green, from bottom all the way up and down. Just like we did with this flesh colored part, we're going to do the same thing, but only on the green, as close as you can get to the edge, about a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance, if you can get to it, to something that narrow. Just be careful, just kind of, you know, take your time. I'm still going to go ahead and use a 3mm stitch length, I believe, is probably what I'm going to do here. It's not, the only tight spot is going to be up here. If you feel like you need to decrease your stitch length, you can do that around this edge. I think we'll be fine though. I don't think I'm going to need to decrease. I think I'll probably keep a consistent 3mm stitch length throughout. So I'll do it here, and then I'll also do it on this side. I'm going to change my thread to this sage green color to do this, just like we did on the nose. Okay, so then the ears, we're going to do the same thing we did on our face. Is put a few drops of thread lubricant on the green part. This is the inner ear, I believe. And just spread it around with your finger. And we're going to stitch on the inside edge of the green part, getting as close as you can to that outer edge without getting into the brown parts. And I'm going to use a 3mm stitch length on this. Okay. So same things with these. You could have either back stitched or you can hand tie, like hand knot them. Okay, so then what you're going to do is trim away any of the brown vinyl that you don't want there. So at first I was considering this an optional step. But depending on the vinyl that you use, you could have some show through from the other side. So I decided just to tell you in the instructions to go ahead and trim it, because that way at least you can get a little closer to like where the original stitch line is supposed to be, and hopefully there won't be any show through to the other side of the vinyl. It also gives you a little bit more leeway in terms of like when you're top stitching this piece, where if you didn't line this up exactly, you won't be in danger of stitching over two layers of vinyl rather than just one. So again, if you feel comfortable, you can just leave it alone if you think you lined it up correctly. That's what it should look like then on the back. Just get as close as you want to the stitching without actually cutting into the stitches, and then you should be good. Okay, so now we need to put our ears onto our ear pieces, or the main ear pieces, right? So the fuzzy part if you're using fuzzy fabric. Okay, so just like we did with the face, we're going to use some double-sided tape to keep this in place. You can also glue it down. I'm only going to use one piece because I'm using 1/2 inch, and I just don't need that much. I'm keeping my tape outside of my seam allowance so I don't sew through the tape. My machine does not like double-sided tape. And then just center this as best as you can. You want to align the bottom edges and then just get it as straight as you can. It's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. My cutting of this fabric was not great, I will say. I was way off in curves. My ears are going to be a hot mess. That's okay though. All right, I think that's good enough. Okay, so we're going to top stitch along this flesh colored area all the way around. Same on the other one. I'm going to use 3mm stitch length. This time we are going to top stitch even on the bottom part too, just to kind of keep things in place. So you're going to go from one edge all the way up, around, and across the bottom. Let me make sure that this is really straight because I'm going to have to cut off some of it, I think. I think I'm fine. All right. Using my handy dandy thread lubricant on both pieces. This really does help the needle glide over the vinyl without it sticking. Sometimes you don't have super sticky vinyl and you're going to say, why, Kim, why do I need thread lubricant then? I'll tell you why. You can still get drag. It can still not glide perfectly over that vinyl and you'll experience drag and it'll pull and you'll have uneven stitches. So that is why. So I like to start at the bottom because it doesn't matter really what I'm stitching here and how ugly it looks. And I'm staying about 1/8 of an inch away, and I'm using a 3mm stitch length. Okay, so now you have your ears appliqued down. Okay, so you have 2 other ear pieces. Try and decide if this is going, I think it's going to be thick enough as is, or do I need more stabilizer? I think I'm good. So I just stabilized one side. This is Peltex, and Peltex is pretty thick. So I'm going to leave that alone. Okay, so you are going to take one of your sides, or one of your ears, flip it over, right sides together. Same thing with this side, flip it over, right sides together. I don't know which one of these is more accurate in terms of the cuts, but look how off my cuts are. I don't like cutting faux fur. I'm never accurate. Okay, so we are going to stitch around the outer edge. This time it's 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So from the bottom all the way up and down. Leave this open because we're going to turn using this opening. Okay, so go ahead and snip into your curves just so that they lay flat when we turn this right side out. Just along the curved edge. You don't need to snip in the straight edge. Make sure you are not cutting your stitches. Get as close as you can to the stitch without actually cutting your threads. I have cut my threads many times before. You have been warned. I'm spacing it quarter of an inch, half an inch away, or in between, something like that. Okay, I think I'm good. The hard part is working with Peltex, trying to turn it right side out. I might need a hair dryer. Maybe not. Let's see. Let's see how successful we are. Otherwise, you can soften it with a hair dryer and it should turn pretty easily. Because remember, I've got Peltex and I've got vinyl. If you have a turning tool, go ahead and use that to kind of gently push everything out. I'm not being rough at all. All right. So cute. Are they approximately the same size? Look at that. Not that far off. So cute. Okay. We have an option here. We can top stitch or not. I do recommend top stitching all the way around the edges and also top stitching down here too, just to close out the bottoms. But if you're using fuzzy material like this, you could probably leave out the top stitching. I just don't know that it's going to be necessary. I'm going to see how it looks. I might end up ripping it out though. Let's see, what should we like? I don't know. It looks fine. So this is how much of a difference it's going to make with you're going to use like faux fur like this. So up to you. I think it would have been fine without it too. I think if you're using vinyl or you're using fabric, for sure top stitch. Okay, so ears are done. Okay, so now we just need to mark where our ears are going to go. So using your pattern piece, I'm going to flip this over actually, because I'm not going to be able to see marks on faux fur. Here's where my center line is. I suggest when you're making marks, you use a pattern notcher. So this is what I have. This is a D-A-H-Y-I-N-G brand. I don't know what that makes a difference. But I mark my center and wherever I need to place marks on my pattern piece. So it makes these little notches for myself, so I know where to mark. Actually, this one I need to go a little bit deeper. There. I think it's pretty handy. So now I have, so I can see, so see now I have these little marks here. So when I lay this over my center mark, which is down here, I can take a pencil or whatever your marking tool is and just put my marks on. Makes it way easier to mark things. And this should line up with the center. Yep. So now I have my marks here, 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 and here. Now you can choose to just leave the marks, just making them a little bit deeper for myself. Or you can use your pattern notcher again and actually mark the actual pattern, or sorry, the actual fabric itself, so that there's little holes there for you to go by. So I'll often do that too. I mark the actual pattern fabric piece. And by the way, I love using regular pastel chalk pencils. This is the Derwent brand, and you can get them at like any art supply store. I think Amazon might carry them too, but more than likely like Amazon art supply stores like Blick or Plaza or any of those. But it's just pastel chalk pencil. You want the kind that is just chalk, not the oil based. That will not come off. So the chalked based, you just sharpen it like you would a pencil, and they come in a ton of different colors, and you can mark anything. You can mark vinyl, you can mark fabric, and then it can come right off. So these are really handy to use. When I used to do a lot of drawing, I used to use a lot of pastel pencils like this. So I pulled those out when I started sewing more. Okay, so now that we have our marks, it's going to make it a little bit easier. Again, oh shoot, I marked at the bottom, but I marked the wrong spot. We're going to do that again. So there's my center. Make sure you're marking the top of your pattern or your piece here, main A. Don't mark the bottom like I did. Okay, top. All right, great. Okay, so because we can't see the marks on this side, we're going to have to keep flipping it over, which is fine. Okay, so we're going to need clips, pins, whatever you want to use. Try and decide what's going to be easier for me. I was going to use pins, but I think I'm going to go back to that plan. All right, so I'm going to use some pins here. And we're basically going to be placing these so that these points are on each side. These longer points need to be on the left and the right. Okay, so that's how it's going to look. It needs to go with this curve. We're going to flip these down. The edges need to go between the two marks we just made, and we're going to ease this into the curve. So, because we can't see it on this side, I'm going to flip it over to this side so I can kind of see where things need to line up. You basically want the center of these two marks to align with the center of your ear. So right about there. And I am going to clip some of this because it's vinyl. I'm not going to be able to get a pin through. So you want to clip it to like that center. So then what you're going to do is you're going to ease this around the curve. Okay, so you just want it to go with the curve. Let's see if this will actually, oh, see, pins aren't going to be a good idea. Not a good idea with this. My material's too thick. I'm going to have to use clips. So just kind of ease it around the curve. Let this bend with the curve. All right. This part's going to be a little bit tougher because I'm using Peltex. Why did I use Peltex? See, this should be your warning. Maybe don't use Peltex. I'm going to ease this around that curve. It is very difficult to bend. Am I between the lines? No, I'm not. Hold on. One moment. I'm just slightly off. Okay, let's try that again. Am I between? Ah, now I am. Now I am. Okay, let's ease this back. Again, you're going to have to just kind of curve that ear to match the curve of this circle here. Use as many clips as you think you need. I think I need a lot, but I like to clip a lot too. You could also staple this, which I may do. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is curving pretty much with the pattern piece. See, it's now making this kind of arch. It's because I had to line it up so it kind of curved with the pattern piece. I'm going to staple it in place. So where I clipped, I'm just going to take one clip out at a time. Actually, which way I'm going to sew this so that this is at the bottom. So I want my smooth side of my staples here. Did it actually go through? No. Because I took the clip out and now it's not aligned. All right, make sure things are getting aligned the way that they're supposed to before you staple. There we go. I just try to stay in the seam allowance if I can, but when it comes to faux fur, who knows if it's actually gonna like stay put. So I'm just happy the staples go through. Sew over a staple, I sew over a staple. All right. So we're going to do one at a time. So now we're just going to baste about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, we have one done. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now you're ready to start following the instructions in the main Emo Circle Bag pattern. So you would treat this as if it was just the front panel. So you're going to leave this folded down, attach it to your gusset like the instructions say, and it's going to be a little rough going over this part where the ears are when you're binding everything, but just take your time. I used Peltex. I do have to warn you, this is adding a lot of bulk. I not only have Peltex, I have some interfacing. This is like a faux fur. Like, I think it's gonna be a struggle, but I'm down for the challenge. Just make sure your machine can handle whatever stabilizer you've chosen to use. But otherwise, this is going to be treated just like your regular circle that you're attaching to your gusset. Mind you, the ears are warping your shape a little bit, okay? Because we had to kind of ease everything. You're going to have to, when you're attaching this to your gusset, make sure that this is still staying pretty curved, right? To keep its shape. You don't want it to flatten out. So you're going to have to just make sure you're doing that as you're kind of attaching this to that gusset. Just kind of play with it a little bit to kind of pull, not too hard, but pull it, you know, just to kind of ease it to make sure it stays curved and it doesn't go flat on you, because you want it to stay curved. What you're actually going to end up looking at, let's see if we can make it do what I think it's going to do once it's sewn. So, I mean, mind you, there's going to be a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, but this is essentially what it's going to look like here in this top part. It'll stay, hopefully, a little curved for you so that it doesn't flatten out. That's why we did those. This is why we were easing those ears in, so you keep its shape at the top here. So hopefully that works for you. But this will give you a kind of a little sneak peek of how this is going to look. I think my ears are a little wonky, but it's okay. Kind of play with it and see. When you attach it to the gusset, I definitely suggest that you attach this front piece first, stitch everything around, turn it right side out, make sure the ears are doing what you want the ears to do. Like, mine are a little weird, so I might have to do a little bit of adjusting just to make sure this is maybe aligned a little differently so that it is a little more even, where these two are facing out a little bit more like that. So you'll have to kind of play with it, but I don't think I'm going to have to do too much adjusting there. I think it's going to look cute. I'm excited. All right, so that is it. I hope this was helpful in showing you how to put this part of it together so you can make a bunch of monster bags. I want to see them all. Make sure you join my Facebook group, share all your makes, ask questions there. Feel free to ask questions in the comments of this video, but definitely head over to the Facebook group. There's a ton of people there that can help you, that have made a lot of my patterns before and may have come up against some issues that you're also having. So be sure to ask your questions there. But otherwise, I hope you have a good day. I hope you enjoy this pattern. I enjoyed designing it and making it for you. It is all free. These appliques plus the main bag pattern, the Emo Circle Bag pattern, are free to my Facebook group members. So go over there and join so you can download the files for free. And make sure you also subscribe to my channel, like this video. I'd love to be able to give you more content, but I can only do that if I know you're going to be watching. So let me know that you've watched this by hitting that like button. And until next time, bye.